Thank you, thank you. Good to actually really see the source of all knowledge here. I've never seen the plant here before. A couple of big distinctions first. Heart rate variability is actually a very big field of measurement, right? So I like to call it state-dependent measurement. So the big confusing thing about this is the measurement side of it is completely separate from the biofeedback side. The two don't work together at all, and people get very confused by that. So what you're going to see in the biofeedback will be one thing, but know that there's a very big universe of people very interested in the measurement of heart rate variability, which means just the beat-to-beat differences in heart rate. Basically, you get a pulse or an R wave each time your heart beats. The distance between the R waves or the pulses is measured in terms of time and then translated into heart rate. And the variability of that is actually a good thing. Unlike most things that you'd think of, good variability means good resilience, good means homeostasis, good adjustment to the environment. Very steady heart rates, beat to beat to beat to beat, are very bad. You go right to, if we see somebody with a flatline heart rate, we take them right to the emergency room. And they're going to die soon. So you've got a really nice, healthy heart rate, and you can kind of see it bopping along. And what's the name? Steve. So you can kind of see it bopping along in the purple there, Steve, even though he's manipulating a little bit. And so we have a whole bunch of measurements of heart rate variability. The simplest one is simply the standard deviation, or how much variability there is from beat to beat to beat to beat. And there's a whole world of 150,000, 200,000 citations in medicine using those measurements for mortality prediction, morbidity prediction, in sports for fatigue, for all kinds of things. None of that applies to what we're going to do with the biofeedback, so that you got to keep those separate. Okay. So the biofeedback came about because myself and another colleague, Paul Lehrer, were interested in looking at the parasympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system. In our early days in biofeedback, all we really were concerned with was kind of calming down arousal, calming down the sympathetic part of the autonomic system. So our hand temperature and EMG were basically aimed at, skin conductance, aimed at calming down sympathetic arousal, which is the fight-flight branch of the autonomic nervous system. But the other side of the nervous system, the parasympathetic, hadn't really been looked at very much, and it isn't so easy to get at measurement-wise. But we realized in initially looking at hypertension and high blood pressure that possibly the parasympathetic was something we ought to be looking at with biofeedback. So we came up with a brand new idea that was 2,500 years old, which is basically looking at different maneuvers with breathing that have an effect on the autonomic nervous system, especially on the parasympathetic nervous system. And when we looked at very experienced meditators and yogis and swamis, the more experienced they were, we noticed, and we hooked them up to equipment like this and asked them to do something that got them to be centered, calm, more resilient. Whatever language, we did it with Zen monks, with Tibetan monks, with yogis, swamis in India, and Japanese Zen monks. Those are the groups we went to. And however we got to translate, do something that gets you calm, resilient, centered. They all did basically the same thing. They moved their breath rate to a very specific slow breath rate and described something that I think we in the West call mindfulness. That is a detached mental attitude where you observe yourself without judgment. Move from being a judge to a witness, we say. Switch your mentality from being a judge of the world, which we normally are, to a witness where you just observe things in a non-judgmental way. Those two things together were the things that they all had in common when they did it. We also noticed that they breathed at exactly one rate. Each one of these guys, it wasn't the same rate, but whatever rate they chose to do it during the time we hooked them up, they always went back to that time and time and time again, including some of the people that that Eric has brought in that put skewers through their tongues and skewers through their neck. They still maintain those exact rates during those times. So we then began to think that maybe there was a Western version of this that we could do where we could find that specific frequency of breathing and teach people to do it at that frequency and have them practice on a regular basis and have some beneficial effects. The effects that were touted in the Eastern literature were better blood pressure, longer life, and, all kinds of positive effects. There wasn't much science behind much of that, but certainly were a lot of claims to that. So what we designed was in the first just sort of crude version of this, where we used a pacer that you can see here, and we had the patient or subject or student, whoever it was, just start breathing at specific paces. And I'll have you do that, Stephen. So you're going to breathe in and breathe out. And what you'll notice if you're looking at the heart rate is that there's a very that there's a very characteristic pattern to the heart rate with breathing. Yeah. So the purple is heart rate, beat to beat heart rate. The white one here is breathing. Then we're also going to have skin conductance and temperature on the line graph. And this is a spectral analysis which looks at all the different frequency components within a given heart rate. In healthy heart rates, we saw before, what we should see is not a very consistent spectral analysis, lots of different frequencies. His heart rate should have looked a little bit chaotic. Healthy heart rates are kind of complex and a little chaotic. But now you can see when he breathes at this pace that everything kind of smooths out and begins to follow this pattern. The reason it follows the pattern is there's a reflex in the parasympathetic nervous system, the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, which has a reflex so that when you breathe in, there's a brake on your heart that goes off when you breathe in and goes on when you breathe out. And it makes sense if you think about it, because you'd want your heart rate to be a little faster when there's oxygen present during inhalation, and then take a break when you're breathing out because there's not much oxygen there, right? So that rhythm is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And it occurs all the time, but when you do this slow breathing, you can see you get an exaggerated version of it. All of a sudden, heart rate starts going up a lot, and then goes down a lot, and we get a pattern that ordinarily wouldn't be seen as a healthy pattern in ordinary life, but during this special slow breathing time is actually quite a powerful tool. And then we began doing studies to see how that would work clinically and in other ways, and what we found is very dramatic results. We kind of matched the results that the yogis were telling us about. We got lowered blood pressures in people, especially labile hypertensives, were getting much better blood pressures. And it was better than just relaxation. We got people with a certain reflex in their cardiovascular system that would be improved by 30%. It was a reflex that all the cardiologists told us could not be changed. It was mutable for life. And we had people go improve that reflex by 30%. It's called a baroreflex. It's a reflex between blood pressure and heart rate. And when that happened, we started to see positive results on a whole variety of disorders, whole range of things that we treat with biofeedback. We were starting to get really good results with using this training in the process of doing it. And we use it with athletes. We use it with students. So it's actually a kind of high-tech version of meditation or yoga. We did notice, in fact, that when we went to look at yoga instructors in around San Diego, where I'm from, the more experienced the yoga instructor, the slower they breathe during shavasana, during the death pose. The people who just got a training course in Toronto and then are teaching at the YMCA last week, they're breathing 11, 12 breaths a minute. The really experienced people were breathing between 5 and 7 breaths a minute. Okay, so you see, for one thing, this very nice sine wave in the heart rate. His heart rate is going from 57 beats a minute up to 70 beats a minute in each breath cycle. All right, so he's showing these really big peaks and valleys, which we like to see. It's a pretty nice looking sine wave for the heart rate. That means that the parasympathetic nerve is really taking over and doing that braking the way it's supposed to. His hands are getting warmer. We all know that means more relaxation, and his hands are getting drier. So during this particular phenomena, what we see again and again and again is that kind of split where hands get warm and dry in a continual basis. And as people get better at it in practice, they can, within 3 or 4 breaths, they can switch into that mode very quickly. So for the athletes, we need them to be so good at it that before they serve a tennis ball, before they go up to bat in baseball, before they do a gymnastics routine, they have to be able to get into this state very quickly. And we train them to do that, and then that seems to be associated with much better performance in these kinds of sports that we're talking about. Yeah, so what's happening here is you're turning off the sympathetic nervous system completely. So that's why your hands get warm and dry. And you're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. And we think we're stimulating also something called vagal afferents. There's a whole elaborate nervous system going from the gut to the brain, which is actually more elaborate than the brain to the gut. And when you do this kind of phenomena, you get a very big push into the brain for that. So one of our new projects is looking at how the brain's actually affected by this kind of phenomena. It seems to be dramatically affected. And
you see temperature
going up.
gradually rising and skin conductance going down.
Right.
So indicative of relaxation, basically.
Indicative of shutting off sympathetic flow,
Which is the stress
which is the stress response, shutting that off and stimulating the parasympathetic. Now, the parasympathetic has a lot of benefits to it to stimulate it. It's the part of the system responsible for healthy digestion. It protects the body from sympathetic flow. So one of the big applications we have, we just finished a big study in Germany for low back pain, where we compared it to other kinds of treatment, and we got much better results when we combined this kind of biofeedback with trigger point releases, the two together. And we think the reason that works is that when someone practices this on a regular basis, the parasympathetic system protects the trigger points from sympathetic input. That's the stress response into your muscles. It's not in regular muscle, it's into the trigger point of the spindle of the muscle. So what we see is that with the buildup of this system, we get protection from pain in those muscles by people practicing on a regular basis. So what we do is we go through different paces. We just started with 6, and that worked great for him, but we would go through 7, 6.5, 6, 5.5 different paces until we found one that produced the best valley to peak differences, the best smooth wave, the best response in sympathetic. And then once we've set on that pace, from our research, once you've found what we call the resonance frequency, it lasts for life. If you're an adult, it never changes. So then we give them something to go home and practice with at that pace. So the website Easy Air, those are all applicable. You set it to your pace. Once you know your pace, let's say his was 6, you got to practice at least 10 minutes a day. We found out that we always said 20 minutes a day, and we found out that people will really practice 10 minutes a day. They won't practice 20. We tell them 20, and we hope for 10. So we try to get 10 minutes a day of daily practice, and you need to do pretty much daily practice to keep this reflex built up. It's not just something that happens immediately. It's actually a stronger state that changes in your body. And once you've done that, then you kind of learn this rescue breathing technique where you can do it really quickly. And we have people do that throughout the day for stress management. And then depending on the other applications, whether it's in sports or in pain, they may do it, like in the pain patients, they do it during massage or during chiropractic releases or other things like that. So we try to get the patient practicing regularly. And we get reports of remarkable results. Probably the best results we have are with kids with abdominal pain. So the leading cause of medical visits of children are belly aches. If you have kids, you know this is true, right? They wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, Mommy, my tummy hurts." And you say, "Oh, you're just faking, go to school." They go to school, and the school calls and said, "Your child threw up, come pick them up," and you feel like a terrible parent. Or you keep them home, and they bounce in the bed and play, and you realize you've been had, right? There's always one or the other. So with the kids with the belly aches, usually what we found in those kids, they're all internalizers. They're slightly anxious kids. They're a little bit perfectionistic. They're under a lot of pressure to do well in whatever they do. Nowadays, lots of kids feel a lot of pressures to get into the best university in 3rd grade, right? They start to worry about that stuff. And that kind of internalizing anxiety, even small amounts, basically shuts off the parasympathetic nervous system. So We think of the vagal, think of going downhill with a slightly downhill accelerator and brake. The way the vagus works is it's a rhythmic brake. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. All right, so just like your grandparents drive with the left turn signal on to Florida.
2 feet.
2 feet, exactly. So what happens in the kids is that vagal brake is off. We've done ambulatory studies where we put them in monitors where we monitor them throughout the school day. And the kids that we're talking about, they're normal kids. They're not mentally ill in any way, but they're just a little bit more anxious and a little bit more perfectionistic. And that means that their brake is off a lot because they're worried about things a lot. So if the brake is off, your gut doesn't get the input it needs from the parasympathetic nervous system to really do its job of moving things along and keeping it pain-free. So we get about 3,000 kids a year are referred to our children's hospital in San Diego with this problem. This is after going to a primary doctor. Then they go to the gastroenterologist, and we get about 12 referrals a week in our clinic for these kids. And I'd say 80% of them we get completely better in about 3 or 4 weeks. And these are kids that have been out of school, homeschool, going to emergency rooms. It's an incredibly powerful way of affecting the parasympathetic nervous system. It's hard to believe it could be that powerful, but it really is.
Dick, right now Stephen has been breathing with the pacer, and you can see his temperature going up and his skin conductance going down. The red line is the temperature rising, and the yellow line is the skin conductance going down. Stephen, if you just look away from the pacer, just look at everybody. And if you can take off your shirt in front of everybody and tell everybody how you feel doing this kind of training right now.
You're trying to make me stress a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, look at your yellow signal just went up.
There
and
goes
it's still going up.
That's the skin conductance
That's your
going.
sympathetic arousal, and now the red signal, the temperature, is going to start very slowly going down. It's a much slower response, but you see it stop rising.
Right. And if you
So-
look at the heart rate, you'll see that all of that rhythmicity in the heart rate went away, right? So basically the brake went off. When Mark stressed him, the brake goes off. The first thing your body's going to do when you're faced with a threat is take the brake off. So the whole point here for ordinary stress management is don't let that brake be off for too long, right? If you have a stressful life, you can manage that stress better if you just put a little bit more brake into your life, either through practicing daily or through doing a couple of rescue breaths during the day, or some combination of those together. It seems to work much better than doing a full-fledged relaxation training where you just get very calm, like you go into a relaxation room and relax. That's useful, but this seems to be more generalizable to the everyday environment when you actually can do this kind of a skill. And it looks like as long as people keep practicing, they maintain this improved function. You don't have to necessarily practice every day, but there's at least maybe a 48 to 72 hour overview of how that works. So we try to get people to do that for all these different purposes that we're doing. You just close your eyes. When the music goes up, breathe in. When the music goes out, breathe out. In, out, out. Good job, good job. So now you'll start to see the spectral resolve into one peak. Should probably turn the gain up in that. Yeah, depth doesn't seem to be important. So we want to. The other thing we really try to teach people to do is not hyperventilate. So when you first start doing this, if you try to do big, deep breaths, you hyperventilate, get dizzy. It's unpleasant, especially adults. Kids don't seem to mind to hyperventilate, but adults don't like it. So you've got to be careful about that. So we try to instruct people not to worry about the depth, but just to worry about trying to get a nice, slow waveform. Easy Air is fantastic because you can adjust everything on it, and you can't in the other ones. The problem is that you have to sit in front of a PC or a laptop to do it. So what we find is that some people are very willing to do that, and if they do, they love it. But other people are not willing to do that, so you have to kind of find some way. Many people just can do it just by counting. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Once you get good at it, you can do it. I can do it, absolutely. I had an MRI for my back, they put me in this thing and they started pounding away, and I just went into my breathing, and I know exactly how to do it. And I just kind of slept through the whole thing, basically. I wasn't bothered a bit by it. The problem with stress is not too much accelerator usually. It's not enough brake. If you think about it that way. So it means that if you're mildly stressed all day long, no major emergency, just mildly stressed all day long, aggravated by these guys all day long. Those guys. That is more harmful than big major emergency stressors that you get over quickly. So if those kinds of long, aggravating, stressful days like traveling, I can speak to that from now, seem to produce this kind of vagal withdrawal all the time, and that seems to be more important for everyday life than big emergencies. Now, in combat, it's not true. Combat, those are major fight-flight responses, but that's a unique, unfortunately, too common phenomenon. But the practice at home is really what all the action is. So we're sending these people out with these skills. If we do need more sessions, usually, since I'm a psychologist, it would be to do more psychological stuff with them.
Right. In most cases, what you're seeing, and also some of the workshops we give at the Infinity and we show, people are doing this, and the minute that they just turn away from it, they go back to their 15, 16 breaths a minute.
They should, yeah. You're not supposed to breathe. Yeah, you're not supposed to breathe slowly all the time. Otherwise, we would have evolved to do that, right? So actually, there's quite a bit more resilience for everyday life in normal breathing. We want all that to be much more chaotic, and all that. The chaotic heart rate is what you need most of the time. It's just that once or twice a day, just like exercise, right? If you couldn't exercise all day long, 12 hours a day, that wouldn't be good for you. But if you do a half an hour a day, everything looks abnormal when you're exercising, right? What he's doing now looks very abnormal from a measurement point of view, for if that was his normal breathing. If he looked like that all the time, we'd be worried. But during that period that he's practicing, it's like exercise. It takes the body into a completely different place, strains those reflexes long enough to get them stronger, and then when you go back to everyday life, you breathe normally again, and then you've got that resilience built into it that you can use for stress management. Here's where I think we have a giant advantage over the heart math, because we can see skin conductance, temperature, respiration, most important, respiration. So people using the heart math type devices, all they see is heart rate. Right? So you can kind of get it, but this way you can really see the synchrony between the breathing and the heart rate. You can see the skin conductance temperature split, and use the full amount of physiology to kind of get it. And I think once you've done that, it's really hard to go back to just doing heart rates. So like if you look at gymnastics, there's a sport where the Eastern Europeans sort of figured out a long time ago that mental preparation was more important than anything. And so when we talked to our guys coming back from Olympics in those days, they said, you can never beat those East Germans. They're robots. They have no emotion. Well, it wasn't that. They just did so much mental rehearsal that they locked into the routine so beautifully.
And no drugs.
And yeah, well, plus drugs. Yeah. And the women all had mustaches, but never mind that. So, but for golfers with the yips, it's a great technique for that. So you can go out with a laptop, and so what I did with one pro golfer, I went out. What he was doing was he was pulling the ball in every par 3. He couldn't stop pulling the ball off the green to the left, and he'd just get when he was under pressure.
Too much pressure to get on.
Too much pressure. So and the rest of the shots were okay. That was the one. So and then we went out there, and with no pressure, he had no problem. So I said, okay, we're coming out there, get a buddy, and we're betting $100 a shot who can get closer to the hole. Because that was enough money to put some pressure on him. Then he had another pro, and they bet $100 each shot. And I hooked him up, and I'm standing kind of as far as I can. I didn't have the Bluetooth, so standing away from him, and I'm telling him when he can hit the ball. So I'm saying, you're not in the zone, don't hit it yet, don't hit it yet. Oh, you're getting there, how are you doing, And yes, hit it now, and boom, right at the green, right? So that was a way, and then once he kind of figured out how to do that, he broke that problem with that. So for things like that, for gymnastics, colleague Ben Strack works with a lot of Major League Baseball players, where they have to see the ball, kind of get in the zone, that kind of stuff. It seems to be quite positive for that kind of stuff. I think I was a soccer coach. I think for the set plays, I was somewhat successful. I had no success with regular soccer. I mean, it's just too fluid, too much happening. So I don't think you can exactly do it in those kinds of
Yeah,
things.
it's more about the quiet moments in sport.
Yeah.
Return of serve.
At least
or
that's the
free
easy-
throws in
yeah.
basketball, where you're kind of quiet for a minute and you have too much time to think
Yeah,
about it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the goaltending in any sport, goaltenders are sitting around a
Yeah,
lot,
quiet
and it's a
moments,
great
yeah.
time for them, yeah.
Well, for me, for running, when I'm running, when you're running marathons and this and that, what do you do?
Train.
Train, no, for breathing. Breathing is still abdominal as when you're pushing it.
Just make sure you have good abdominal strength, that you have good diaphragmatic strength. I think that does help sport, but beyond that, I don't think it's much useful. I mean, if your mind's wandering when you're running, it doesn't seem to matter to me. I know if I'm having a real problem solving something, I'm a statistician, I get on my bike and suddenly it all clears up for me. So that's kind of gets that frontal lobe working in a different way. So, yeah, we have some studies on sleep onset, and sleep maintenance. That it is you can't breathe that way during sleep, but that this strengthening this reflex seems to be beneficial for sleep. It's not tremendously powerful, but it definitely has an impact. So we've seen it in several studies. So practicing 10 minutes a day should be better for your sleep overall.
Well, doesn't it basically reduce adrenaline production and enhance?
Yeah, so you're knocking down anything like relaxation would also work that way too. But it isn't as strong. It isn't as strong an effect on sleep as we'd hope for. But it's a real one. It's just not quite as strong. And for some people, I should say, probably 20% of people. I don't know if you felt sleepy when you were doing it at all.
A little bit.
They will conk right out when they do this breathing. So some people will say, oh yeah, I put my little music on every night. I used to take me an hour and a half to fall asleep. Now it takes me 5 minutes because I never hear the end of the first musical piece.
This puts me to sleep.
So,
This
yeah.
how it does to me too.
It
I
does,
have
it
it
puts me to
on
sleep.
and I just listen to it up
Yeah.
and down, and I don't have a problem sleeping when I was sleeping.
Yeah.
Sometimes I fall asleep with it on. It shuts off.
Yeah. So, but for me that doesn't work very well. Even though my physiology is going great, my hands are warm, I can tell I'm right in the rhythm, because my frontal lobe is too stupid, it's too active.
Well, that's what I find
So-
this does, is it calms down.
Yeah, it does, for some people, absolutely. For me, I need a podcast. So I do that. I put on a earbud with a podcast of something that I'm interested in, and then I'm gone.
Oh, like you want?
Spectrum is looking for all the different frequency components of heart rate. So your heart rate frequencies are, you have one frequency at your breathing. There's another frequency for your blood pressure. There's another frequency for your vascular tone. So in really complex, that's why I say if we could look at the screen and boost the signal. So you get very complex looking normal resting heart rates. And so at that point, you've got a bunch of different frequencies that's showing up in that spectral. When you move to your slow breathing, we get only one peak, right where you were breathing at 6. And ordinarily that wouldn't be healthy in our everyday life, but when you're doing the practice, that's exactly what we want. We want all of those. And in all of these meditators, we got dramatic, we call it a meditator's peak. That peak at the 0.1 hertz in this one, remember seeing that? That one peak at 0.1 hertz? In the meditators, they right into that peak, just right into it like that. And so we just finished 2 studies, which we published, showing that average college kids playing a video game, in one case the video game was contingent on resonance frequency, and the other one just playing the video game itself, that these guys got substantial increases in heart rate variability pre to post at rest during resting time, right? So they're systemically, their body is producing better parasympathetic regulation from practicing every day for 5 weeks. And we had another one in Christina's study as well. We've done it about 5 times, and it definitely seems to produce baseline differences. So you're actually changing, and our clients, it's really dramatic. I always do this with my clients, and so I take 5 minutes of baseline before we start, we do the training, then we do 5 minutes after they're doing better, and even if their symptoms are gone, it's very convincing to them to show them this parameter that has changed by 35% over 5 weeks. A resting parameter, just in their basic physiology, has changed by that amount over 5 or 6 weeks. And so they'll say, well, I know my pain's gone, but this is really cool that my heart rate variability went from 48 to 78. something like that. And we see that regularly in patients that we're training. If you're a chronic pain patient, you're going to have reduced heart rate variability. If you practice regularly, then a minute is great. But you got to first put in some time practicing. Then you'll hit that sweet spot when you're practicing, just like in the office. It makes a big difference. And so, like, we would see that split in our patients after they've really practiced. They can do it in 3 to 4 breaths. You start seeing the split. So they're turning that boat a lot faster once they've really got that skill down. The beginning time, it takes a long time before they finally get it. So once you kind of get the base skill, then just practicing intermittently, just like you say, just a minute or two even, seems to be very, very beneficial.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you.